Today is the 9th of Elul and the 11th, I guess, or 12th of September. Okay, 3 days apart. And we're in the middle of chapter 19 of Shorish Mitzvah Satfila and Derech Mitzvah Secha. Okay, so there's two ways of explaining everything we've been doing so far. And basically, we're looking at how we create language, and we're saying that since the Torah uses the parable of God speaking to describe creation, so it makes sense to look more deeply at how we create speech. And to follow that structure or that process, and to say that applies also to how God created the world. So that's the way that you can look at this. And this is the regular way that Chassidus works, and it's based on a verse in Job, Mi b'sari chazeh Eloka, from my flesh I will envision God. And what we mean by envision is obviously not see God, but rather to understand the construct, the structure of how things are in the divine. But there's another way to see it, which is the opposite. Is that now that I know how things are in me, and I've envisioned it in God, and here we're doing it according to the word echad, right? So we said there's God as He is singular, that's the aleph, and then the chet is the chokhmah, the power that puts the letters together. We'll see that joins them into different permutations and words. And finally there's the daled, which is the dibur, the speech. So this is also can be used to awaken ourselves. Meaning that now I come and say, even though I'm not aware of this, because the people who figured this out, that speech is constructed this way, that there are letters before there are words. Is this true, by the way? Are there letters before there are words?
Could be. Some languages don't have written.
So if they don't have written, so that goes contrary to that. It would mean that there are letters. Letters are used in the same way.
Potentially be letters. So what comes first?
Right. So let's take music for instance. What came first? Music or musical notation? Music came first. The same thing is with speech. The way we usually think about this is that speech comes first. People spoke, and then they eventually wanted to write it down. Meaning they wanted to retain what they had said.
Correct.
So when they wanted to retain what they had said, so then they discovered that you need letters. And at first they did hieroglyphs or pictorial alphabets, which represented the full words. And then slowly they moved to a symbolic alphabet, which is supposed to be connected. In English it's less connected, but in Hebrew it's perfectly connected to the first syllable of the name of each letter.
You mean the symbol?
Right.
Yes.
The symbol is
indicative
of the first consonant.
Correct.
That doesn't work in Hebrew. That doesn't work in English.
That first script, I forget the name of it.
It's called Proto-Semitic.
That's
what they call it.
Very representative.
It's phonetic. It means that the letter, the name of the letter, the first consonant of the name of the letter is the consonant that the letter represents.
Correct.
That's a phonetic alphabet.
And there's a form.
English is not like that, by the way. English is really not like that.
But it seems as though we developed away from that.
Who?
We.
Who's we?
In other words, that I forget the name of the scripts, I used to know this. That first script, like a base, looks like a house.
Right. That's called Proto-Semitic.
Right. Okay.
And it's still, and that's what we call it. We call it Beit. Beit means bite.
Right. Okay.
And the first consonant, B, is the letter that this indicates.
Okay.
It's not that way in English.
No.
Because English is much more oral than it is written, which is very surprising to most people. But it means it's an underdeveloped language. It hasn't been fully developed. And I'll explain what I mean. I once said that English is much more rich than Hebrew is, in the sense that there are many more words, at least 10 times as many words. But English is not as developed when it comes to the theory of language. And what I mean by the theory of language is, first of all, the grammar. The grammar in English is much less, it's more irregular than it is in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it's much more regular. It's also missing some of the, it's not Latin, but it's...
Yeah, but I mean, gender's gone.
Right, right. The genders are missing. But let's go to where I'm really headed, which is, how did we, in Hebrew, get to this idea that letters came before speech? Because that's not the normal way that things develop. The normal way, the natural way, call it the innate language, all the languages in the world, first are spoken and then they are written. So the letters come after the words. And here we're saying an opposite thing.
Yeah.
That from God's singularity comes down these letters.
Yes.
They're permuted by the power of wisdom, and only then do they come out as speech by the whole vocal system. That's not the way things are. So what are we talking about? We're talking, so it makes sense. We're talking about how God does it. We're not talking about how human
man does it, right.
Man-made language is different. However, and this is the difference between what we call the oral Torah and the written Torah, and this is why we call them written Torah versus oral Torah. The deep reason is, not because one's written, the other isn't. They're both written today. So that doesn't distinguish one from the other anymore. And both were spoken, so they were both oral, so it's not a very good differential between them. The real reason is because the written Torah started from written words, not from spoken words. In other words, when Moses went up to the mountain, he came down with tablets that had writing on them. He didn't come down with teachings. He didn't come down and say, this is what God said. He came down with writing. Now, it's true that before he came down with writing, God spoke. He spoke, but there's no documentation of that. That's an inner speech. It's a prophecy. So even there you could say there's some element of speech before. But by giving us the Torah that way, that he wrote it on the tablets, and afterwards Moses writes it on the scroll, Torah is, first of all, written, meaning it's mimicking God's process, not our process. That's why we call it the written Torah. But the oral Torah develops the way that human beings develop. We first talk to each other, we speak. And then slowly we figure out, okay, so this is what we mean, and then we write it down, we commit it to writing, and then we get the oral tradition, which is written, just like the written tradition is. So, what does this mean for us? It means for us that when we want to pray now, there's a whole question, what are we doing? Is prayer the oral tradition? Is it part of the oral act of speaking? Or is there here an act of the written tradition? That something needs to come down. So when in Shema we say Echad, and we have this in mind, we're thinking of God's process, the written process, let's call it, where the letters precede the speech. But that also means that even though we're saying this is true of God, we're saying that this is also true of us. Now that we have the Torah, we have an ability to follow the same process, the same way in ourselves. We don't have to only be, meaning, so let's go back to the first chapter. The first chapter we talked about the two different aspects of prayer. That a person prays when he needs it. That's the prayer from the Torah. Or a person prays 3 times a day or 5 times a day, depending on the day, based on a text that has been written. This is the text we're talking about now. We're talking about the second type, the type that is from the sages, that they wrote down a text. Why did they write down this text? Because they want us to go through this process. Meaning we're mimicking God in this sense. The prayer is not just addressing God, as it would be if I would be addressing God whenever I needed Him. It's also going through the process. This whole process that we go through during prayer is to bring down, even in ourselves, from our singular state. We have a yechida also, just as God is yechid, God is singular. We also have a part of our soul that's called the yechida, the singular one, and we're bringing it down to the chokhmah. The chokhmah is called the chaya. the second level of the soul, and from there the speech is all three levels of the soul that are imbued in the body: soul, spirit, and psyche, neshama, ruach, nefesh, and there we speak. So it's as if the whole process of prayer is a process of connecting to our ineffable self. It's very important. There's a part of us that we don't know. There always has to be a part of me that I have no awareness of. It's beyond all my descriptions. I know. But as I start the day, when I start praying, or even in the middle of the day when I pray, or at night when I pray, what I'm doing is I'm tapping into it. I'm trying to bring it down. And I bring it down through this process. First of all, I'm focusing and contemplating God, but this is meant to awaken the same thing in myself. Okay? והנה שורש התערבות הדיבור מבחינת החוכמה, כמו שכתוב, כולם בחוכמה עשית. The beginning of speech is from wisdom. As it says, and we read this actually yesterday, you made everything with wisdom. And it says, Hashem b'chokhmah yasad eretz, and God founded the earth with wisdom. Earth is speech. Earth is malchus, it's kingdom, it's speech. אלו צירופי אותיות העליונים שנבראו בהם שמיים וארץ. These are the supernal permutations of the letters with which heaven and earth were created. So last time we talked about what does it mean that everything is made out of letters. And I said I don't think it means this literally, although I'm not discounting it entirely. But it means that at its core, language is what creates our reality. Without language, there is no reality. We don't know, we can't identify anything without language. And when you mentioned the children that were brought up by animals who have no conception of reality the way we do. על דרך משל בגשמיות, באדם אנו רואים שכוח התחלקות האותיות בהם מוצאות, א' ח' יין מהגרון, בום אף מהשפתיים וכולי, וצירופן בכל דיבור ודיבור, בתיבה זו וכך, בתיבה זו כך, הוא על ידי החוכמה שבנפש. So the ability to take all the 5 origins of speech, which we said are the throat, the guttural letters, then we have the what's the
no, you're going from here up?
I'm going up. Interestingly, in English, the I, O, U, which are known as, what are they?
Vowels.
They're vowels. They're not letters.
No.
They're the equivalent of the Hebrew nikud.
Yeah, correct.
Right? So in English, it follows the exact order. A is the guttural.
I thought of that.
Yeah. E is formed inside the mouth.
Yeah.
I is already the tongue.
Tongue, right.
I. O is the
labials?
O.
No, teeth.
Is the
no, that's labials. It's like
is the teeth.
Yeah.
And the U is the lips.
Yeah.
In English, it follows the exact order. It's something that I picked up a long time ago researching language. In Hebrew, it doesn't, because the nikud in Hebrew doesn't follow that order. It's not.
There an order in the Hebrew?
Yes, there is, and you can see it in every Chabad Siddur at the first page. It has all the nikud, and there it follows the order of the sfirot, and it's not according to the order of the. It's very interesting.
Okay.
There's a lot of reasons for this. Yeah. We'll get into it. So to put all this together so that we can form language, that is what wisdom does. And we said the reason we call this wisdom is because this is not something that we have any consciousness of. It's hidden from us. In the way that that wisdom is a sense of self-nullification. To say it another way, I don't know if you saw there was a movie called The King's Speech. You actually would enjoy it very much because it's about King George. The one that we have, King George, and he was a stutterer, terrible. He stuttered terribly, and he couldn't speak publicly. He couldn't speak at all. And he met this speech therapist, probably one of the first, who taught him how to speak publicly. So it's a humorous and very witty movie. And but the thing that I took from it was that, especially if you're a king, it's very hard to speak in public because you're very self-aware. To be able to speak, you can't think about speaking. It's self-nullification. You can't have self-awareness when you're speaking. You speak the best if you're not aware of yourself. Otherwise, you're like, that's a stutter also, even if you can get the words out. when a person is flowing, it's because he's not thinking about what he's saying. Well, he may be thinking about what he's saying, but he's not thinking about forming the words.
No.
He's not thinking about how it's going to be heard. He's not, it has to follow completely naturally. Which is why the child, the newborn, cannot speak yet, even though he has a voice. I'm talking about, let's say, a 1.5-year-old, and he has thought, and he has emotions, but because he has no self-nullification yet, he has no wisdom yet to put it all together. So wisdom is what's needed. When we say he has thought, we mean he has understanding, but he doesn't have wisdom yet. Because wisdom is the beginning of all the powers of the soul. So what do we mean by beginning? Understanding is there before, and emotions are certainly there before. So what do we mean? We mean in the rectified individual. The individual cannot be rectified, and speech is the first sign that he's communicating. He's not acting like an animal. He can communicate. Now, it's true that some people act like animals anyway, but at least they have some kind of speech. They have some kind of ability to communicate. They have some kind of ability. There's hope that this person will be able to exit the state of being an animal. So that is only when you have self-nullification. That's what's needed to put speech together. And that's why the speech can come down, the letters can come down. We call it shiflus, we call it lowliness. They go to a low place. That only can happen when there's wisdom. And then the speech can project itself to a distant place. What is he saying here? He's saying something very interesting. Just as in order to create the world, we say that God had to contract his infinite revelation, so man, in order to project himself, to express himself, to project his essence with his voice, he can only do that if he learns first to contract himself. There first has to be contraction. You have to learn how to contract. If you can't, what's the contraction? That's what we just said. You have to have self-nullification in order to speak. There has to be a limiting on the whole thing. Meaning, if it's just going to express yourself without some level of lowliness, of self-nullification, it's only going to come out like animal speech, which is like just moans and hums there's nothing there.
Well, in a way, you have to contract all that emotion.
Right.
That's what a child does.
Right.
It can't express until it can.
Right.
And that's a contraction.
Right. And that's why we say that we mimic God in creation. Our creation is like God's creation, except that God creates reality with his speech. We create a reality with our speech. Yeah. Meaning we project ourselves, we bring ourselves out. So that also needs to have contraction in it.
Yes.
The moment that I want to contract myself in order that my speech be heard, which is why I said King George had a difficult time, because he's very, he right away, the moment that he wants to say something, there's an opposite force that says, you want to contract? What do you mean? You're the king. You're supposed to expand. You're supposed to be the all-powerful figure here. How can you contract yourself?
It might be the psychological underpinnings
of
stuttering.
Right, it is.
Mumbling.
That's what the Rebbe kept saying. That if you don't have self-nullification, but it's not just that, the sages say this. Who is heard? A person who has fear of heaven. A person who has fear of heaven is constantly contracting himself under God's will. He contracts his will to do God's will. So his words are heard. They have an impact on the world. His words have value. People want to hear them. But if you have none of that, the moment that you want to contract, that you want to do God's will, there's an opposite force that's always going to awaken, and it's called the force of the world of tohu, of chaos. And it's very interesting that in the world of chaos, it broke and shattered because of lights that came out of the eyes, not of lights that came out of the mouth. You would have thought that in the world of chaos, the spheros spoke improperly, because that's how you ruin the world. Be careful what you say. It says, "Chachamim yizaharu b'divrachem." The Mishnah in Makos says, in Avos, it says, "Wise man, be careful what you say, because if you don't say the right thing, your students will hear you. They will do the wrong thing. You'll just say the wrong thing. They'll do the wrong thing, and they will be guilty of exile, and you'll have to go exile yourself with them." It's a whole terrible process. It starts from speech. So what do you need to do? You need to have a limit. You have to block yourself. You have to stop yourself. But the world of chaos is described as a world of ana imloch. I will rule. I will be sovereign. And the interesting thing is that the Arizal identifies that world with the lights that came out of the eyes, not lights that came. Why? Because apparently, if they would have been able to speak, there would have been some self-limitation on what they're saying. But when you see, there's no limitations. Sight there's no way to limit what I see. I can't ignore, I have to move my eyes to not see. I have to close my eyes. I can't, what I see, I see. There's no way to limit it. And so it says the eye covets. The eye sees and the heart covets. The eye sees, you see it, and then you want it. And you want it without limits. So the ana imloch, it becomes like the light of the eyes. The light of the eyes that has no limits. But speech has limits. And that is the power of wisdom that forms the speech. Okay, so we'll end here. I think this would be right up your alley.
The what is, I'm sorry?
All of this would be right up your alley.
Very good, yeah.